Hey, I wanted to tell you about something that you're going to see in your email inbox here in the next few days, and we will put a link to this in the description of today's podcast. But we are giving you a chance to give us some feedback about the podcast. We want to know how we can better meet your needs, the things that you're looking for, the things that you want from this podcast. When you listen or when you watch, what are you after? And so there's a link to a survey in the comment section or in the description here of this podcast. You also get one in your email inbox. We would like to hear from you to tell us a little bit about what you think, how often you listen, what are you listening for, and how we can make this better. Please give us that feedback, and we'll do our best to shape this into the exact tool that you need to help improve your walk with Christ. Hey everyone, welcome to today's edition of One Single Story, where each weekday we offer a brief lesson from a section of today's reading. Then we examine a single relevant question that passage points us to. Today I'm joined by Rivenbark, and we're looking at a passage from Leviticus chapter 7. Another important application of this sacrificial system for the New Testament believers comes from recognizing that the Most High God gave these precise instructions. It says in verse 38 of chapter 7, "The Lord gave these instructions to Moses on Mount Sinai when he commanded the Israelites to present their offerings to the Lord in the wilderness of Sinai." And often we dismiss this sacrificial system because it's so culturally foreign to us and because theologically it's obsolete. But let's just pause for a minute and consider that for the children of Israel, this was a revelation of God to his people. It was not just a revelation from God, but it was a revelation of God. These rituals were making a statement about God. So, Jay, let's talk about what maybe these instructions teach us about God. What do these precise instructions tell us that we should know about God?
Well, we get some insights. The mere fact that you use the word in here, precision. He is a God of details. Things matter to him. From the very beginning of creation, even the account that we're given, there's specific information that he shares because, again, he's a God of details. In my mind's eye, I see heaven as a place. What limited information we have about it and think of it or know of it, but it is a place of beauty and splendor, but it's a place of precision and meticulous everything. I don't think there's just scattered here and there. He obviously is a God of order. There's even a passage of scripture says he's not the author of confusion, which that could have a lot of applications. You could walk into somebody's bedroom and there'd be confusion because everything is upside down. Walk into the closet.
Right.
I don't want confusion in my closet. Some people say, where you're OCD, you got a problem. I said, no, you're not normal. That's because that's the way I see it. But he is a God of details. And I think that's a huge insight because if you understand he's a God of meticulous detail, then you have to understand that what he's laid out in the Bible for us is by design, it's there for a reason, and he has high expectations of us to adhere to his plan, his order, structure, and not necessarily our own.
I think it speaks to so many things about God, his holiness, why we would need the sacrifices to begin with. The fact that he wanted the people to know that there was a way to be back in right relationship with him, and exactly what it took, right?
Yeah.
Because
wouldn't it be terrible if he said there's a way you can be right stand with me, but you got to figure it all out.
So occasionally my wife and I, if we get cross ways with one another, sometimes my response is going to sit down and say, all right, what do you want here? Right? What is it that you want? And that usually makes her madder. Right, because all I want to know is
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
what do I need to do here to resolve this, right? I don't want to guess,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
And the same would be true with God. Like,
Sure.
it's, is this going to work,
Yeah.
or is this not going to work?
Exactly.
Is it going to be, if I do this, yesterday, I think we ended up touching on some rituals that other Christian sects may have, but they would have penance that they had to do, and it was up to the priest to tell
Yeah,
them,
to make the determination.
right,
Yeah.
whether they said 7 Hail Marys,
Right.
or
What you had to do and how you had to do it and how often you had to do it.
and it was really mostly up to them, right? It's certainly not something they're getting from Scripture, but God laid out some really specific clues to tell us, if you do this,
Right.
even in the New Testament, those who call on the name of the Lord shall be saved, right? So there's still
Something
that has to be done, and we at least know what it is.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things we learn from this system is, as you said, God provides the grace and the forgiveness, but the sacrifice is clearly demonstrated there was something on our part, a requirement, an expectation, to go out. They had to locate an animal, had to meet certain criteria. Then it had to be slaughtered, the blood, and depending on if it was to be burnt, some of it could be consumed and some of it couldn't. And you look from the outside, like you said, that's so antiquated in the Old Testament, it's hard for us to understand that. But those weren't necessarily easy or convenient. I should say convenient things for the people to do. I think part of the lesson, the revelation of who God is through this system was, I have expectations of you. I'm offering you something, but I have an expectation of you. His sacrifice, ultimately, his son cost him something, and it cost them something. As I was reading through and tried to put myself in that time, think about all the years the Israelites were in the wilderness, and even before they went into, quote, the promised land, animals, grain, all the things that had to be sacrificed to meet these requirements were not necessarily readily available or in excess. If you're getting down and you've got just a little bit or a few herd left, but yet you've got to take a portion of that and give that up just for the sake of your sin. You had to sacrifice something in the moment, in the present, for something that you couldn't even see, that wasn't tangible, which we call that faith.
Right.
And so even now, we're called on as believers, according to Scripture, oftentimes to give up, to sacrifice things that are tangible for what is intangible or unseen to us. It still requires an act of faith, and it costs something.
You are much more familiar with animals draining the blood out of an animal and those kind of things than I am. You're a hunter. I'm not.
Yeah, let's clarify that. It's not worship related.
A number of years ago, gosh, and I'm trying to, in my mind, process back how long ago it's been. The business I owned at the time, we sold restaurant equipment, and this guy was buying stuff from us. He said he had a butcher shop. Didn't tell me any details about it, but ended up by his location, and it was focused toward a different religion, right? And they still do animal sacrifices, and they had some specific ways that it had to be done, right? They would cut their throat, drain them, before they, start this process. And it wasn't, I don't know. I that was, so go back to a previous podcast this week. That was a place I got all the, as my mom would say, the heebie-jeebies. Like, that just didn't, I don't know what the heebie-jeebies are, but like
You got them.
I didn't like being there.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't long after that. It's here in North Carolina. They got shut down by the state because they were allowing people of that religion to come onto their property, and essentially they were sacrificing the animals. They weren't cooking them there. They were doing the blood rituals and all, and they got shut down because of it. It seems foreign to us because now we have Jesus and we don't have to do that. But there are people still in the world today that this is their practice, on a regular basis, because there has to be some sacrifice for sin somehow, some way, somewhere.
Obviously we don't practice that because Jesus became the supreme sacrifice once and for all. But when you think about this system, it certainly cost them. Animals, grain, all the above were a significant commodity, of that day. It wasn't money, that was significant that they traded with. It was most often these commodities. And so it cost them something. It was time consuming. There was a lot of effort put into it. It was messy. It was smelly.
Oh, terrible.
It was horrific to some degree. And here's the thing about it. It was ongoing, and so I think there are lessons for us to learn from there, though, that true sacrifices on our part, sometimes they do cost us. They often are reoccurring. They get messy and smelly if sometimes. That's the reality of worshiping and serving and sacrificing. And it's not convenient oftentimes to give a sacrifice.
I may be crossing a line here, but I'm going to ask.
God.
But so most of the animals that you kill, you do from a distance. I think you bow hunt some. You, but you rifle hunt, shotgun. Shoot with a gun. Have you ever done any have you ever had to kill an animal like hand to hand?
No.
Okay.
Now maybe like a bird, maybe that you shot down and went over and it indicated some movement or something, and you quickly dispatch it. But as far as jumping on something, no.
Jumping on something.
Yeah.
No, but what I'm thinking about, I'm thinking about what it had to be like to walk this lamb up to this altar, look it in the eye.
You're talking about domestic animals versus wild, and I would agree. I think I know where you're trying to get to, because to see something from a distance and then it's over with. That's one thing, but the animal that you have raised
for this purpose,
that you're attached to, you got feelings and emotions with it, and to see its innocent eyes, and and it's that's why it's called a sacrifice.
Yeah, the only time I've ever seen anything like this, and I've seen it one time in my life, and I never want to see it again. My grandfather raised hogs, and they would shoot the hogs.
Yeah,
I mean, he'd just walk up to it and put a bullet in his head. But he occasionally would have a cow. He would walk up to that cow, and he's rubbing it on his head.
Yeah, consoling it.
Yeah, I know. And he just reaches right under that cow's neck, and that was it. Right, it was over.
Yeah.
And I know we're laughing about it, but that's foreign. I never wanted to see it again, and I can't imagine. What I want to get to with this is, if we could, before we sin, stop and peer in the eyes of Jesus,
you wouldn't.
You wouldn't do it.
You wouldn't.
Right? You wouldn't.
Yeah.
He willingly became that sacrifice, but in his eyes, like if your eyes tell a story, if you could look into his eyes and see what he was thinking right at that particular moment, it would change the pathway. And if we thought in terms of sacrifice before we committed those sins, it would change our pattern a lot. Well, thank you for joining us today on this edition of One Single Story. We hope you'll be back with us tomorrow as we continue our conversation around the book of Leviticus.